with Field Guard service area being the southeast part of the United States, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the challenges of, the climate and weather in the southeast?
That is a good question. So,
Great question.
That's a wonderful question.
Great question.
Yeah, climate definitely has something to do with. It definitely impacts. Climate impacts fuel quality. Heat, cold, water. Those things all impact fuel and bacteria that grows in them. What happens down here in Florida, where we're at? We have a very high groundwater table, so that means that we get a lot more groundwater entry into tanks. We also have a lot of rain. We have a lot of water entry into tanks. Up in the Mid-Atlantic, they've got to deal with winter issues too, and so as the seasons get colder, diesel fuel will gel and wax. So there's considerations that you need to have with additives in those regions. So you kind of you have to formulate your PM plan around what you're going to be dealing with throughout the year based on where you are.
So let's talk about some of those. We've talked about water a little bit. We've talked about, what about heat? Let's talk specifically about heat.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that.
Okay, that's great. Right. So.
No, I just.
I've got another question. I mean, the answer is probably in itself because heat.
So
a lot of times condensation and.
Well, temperature. When you've got water in fuel, temperature can impact how well the fuel holds onto the water or doesn't hold onto the water. So sometimes you can have a clear sample, and if you take it out and put it in a cold environment, like you go and you sample a tank that somebody thinks, it might be phase separated, but you sample it and it looks clear. But if you put it in a cold environment like a cooler, you can start to see droplets drop out. So temperature impacts the fuel quality, but most of the time the fuel temperature isn't wild on the spectrum because it's inside of a tank in the ground.
Okay, I'm a customer, or I'm somebody who's about to build. I bought and I'm building a brand new retail gas station. How could Fuel Guard, even in those early stages of my business, help me?
So, start your fuel on a preventative maintenance plan from day one. Like before you even get fuel in your new tanks, make sure the tanks are clean after construction first. And then when you get your new load, start your PM program. Do monthly sampling. Remove water from the bottom of the tank whenever you detect it. Now, some people wait for half an inch, for an inch. You shouldn't do that because any amount of water will start the bacteria growth process. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be shut down tomorrow because it takes time for that bacteria to grow, but the more water you have, the quicker the bacteria is going to grow. But any amount of water will start that bacteria growth. A good recommendation for dealing with that is do a routine tank bottom sweep, where you can go and just remove any accumulated water. You can do it on a monthly, a quarterly, a semi-annual basis. The longer you let it go between duration, the more chance there is for a higher amount of water. But the shorter you go in duration, the more you're going to have to pay because it's more trips out there. So we work with our customers to kind of formulate a good PM program that's going to meet their needs in their environment for their use with their budget.
Okay. Let's talk about facility managers. So how is Field Guard service going to help me as a facility manager?
So facility managers are responsible for making sure that the entire building that they're running is working. And what that comes down to in a lot of instances is generators and fuel in generators. So let's talk about like a hospital, for instance. All
Yes.
hospitals have director, facility engineers and backup power and equipment. All that backup power gets serviced by a generator service company. And as part of that, they'll go and they'll check the oil and the filters and all that, but not always checking the fuel. The fuel has not been a common, consistent preventative maintenance item on their plate. So what facility managers need to know is, as they're getting, as the generator passes in good health from the service technician who just said, yeah, your generator's fine, we checked it again, you're good to go. They do a weekly load test, a monthly load test. If they're not checking the fuel, if they don't treat that fuel, it's going to end up, the generator may not fire ever. So the facility managers need to make sure that the fuel that they have in their generators is also within spec.
So, in a lot of those tests,
or not contaminated.
and a lot of those tests, don't interrupt me again. In a lot of those tests, when quite often we see when facility managers, they test the fuel, they'll do it by simply just starting the generator. They'll start the motor, they'll start the engine, let it run for a minute or two.
It's like a load test.
Right, and then turn it off.
And sometimes they let it go for 45 minutes. There's certain, I'm not familiar with every test, but there are a couple of different types where they do load tests where they'll run it for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. Sometimes they do an extended one, not that often.
Right.
Most of the time it's just a short.
Right, and so if I'm not mistaken, and if it's tested for just a very short amount of time, that means that some of the contamination issues are really not going to affect.
That's right.
That short of a test.
Right.
Correct.
So inside the diesel tanks, as the bacteria grows, it grows in colonies, so it kind of grows in pockets, right? And so what you can see with these generators is you may do a load test and it may run fine and you may not have any issues at all. But if you put that same generator under needing to run for 8 hours or 10 hours or 3 days, eventually all that fuel in that tank is going to go through that generator, right? And that's when hours into an emergency where your backup power is kicked on, generator shut down. That happened in Florida a few years ago with Hurricane Irene, I believe it was. I always screw up my hurricane names. I think it was Irene, where there were nursing homes that didn't have adequate fuel supply for their backup generators, and the fuel shut off, and people ended up dying because of it. They got in the nursing home, it was just too hot, so there's no air conditioning. That's hilarious, isn't it? Look at this psychopath. So let me tell you. All right.
Say?
So Sean? What's the funniest part about the elderly people dying?
No, it's not the elderly people. I'll just say it's the pieces of shit that left their parents and grandparents into. I would like to address them if I could. Okay,
You can.
right. All right. So is it
Now
fair?
that I screwed up the shot too.
All right, now it's fine. Okay, so
facility managers, if you're a facility manager and you're doing maintenance on the equipment, you need to check the fuel that's running the equipment too. Because if that fuel's bad, it's not gonna run.
right, and so kind of like what happened in New York City earlier this year.
Yeah.
Huge
They
blackout.
had a huge blackout. I think it was like a day. I think or something like that. Some generators kicked on, some didn't. The other thing too that's important to know is a lot of the diesel engine manufacturers, they know about this diesel contamination issue. So in their warranty language, they have particulate specifications. You can, if there's any contaminated fuel that goes through this engine and you want to file a warranty claim, good luck, because if you put bad fuel in it, they're not gonna warranty it. And that is an incredibly difficult thing to get around because of all the different ways that contamination can make its way into fuel.
Okay, let's talk about Let's talk about fleet managers.
Yep.
Now, a lot of them are going to have some of the issues but I mean, how essential is it for them? I mean, I understand for a retail station that sells gas, it's important to be operational. But these fleet managers, without a fuel quality plan in place, are putting their entire fleets at risk.
Yeah, in their operations. So, and what usually starts my conversations with fleet managers is they have a dispensing issue on site or an accumulation of a lot of equipment issues where they start looking into like, why is this happening? Like, this is the 4th injector on this vehicle this year. Why is this happening? This should not be happening. And they trace it back to fuel. So in those instances, without a preventative maintenance plan, they're doing fine, not putting any money in the budget to clean the fuel. They go well for 5 years, then everything starts breaking, and then it takes a lot to turn that around because it's not just preventing it. You got to reset everything back to zero, and usually that's pretty difficult because you not only have to clean it, but you have components that are degraded. You have engines that are damaged. It's it can be expensive.
Okay.
There's a lot of hidden costs of it. If you start a maintenance plan from day one, you're not going to have any issues with the fuel. You just won't, unless you get a bad load delivered, right? Otherwise, you're not going to have any issues.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What? All right. Now we'll get into some of the nerdy stuff, if you will. This could get long-winded, but we'll edit as needed. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the challenges that diesel faces over the next few years?
So, diesel fuel is a mess.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know where to start. There are many. God, I don't even know where to start.
Let's start with one thing.
One thing.
Top of your head.
Tier 4 engines.
Okay, start there.
So, you've got the new design Tier 4 engines. It's all diesel engines that are 2014 and after are Tier 4. We're working on Tier 5 now. So the engineering is going to become even more precise, which means any more particulate contamination. Okay. I start thinking about so many different. The EPA requires that sulfur comes out of the fuel. So the refineries say, okay, but the EPA did not require them to replace any of the valuable traits of the fuel that are lost without the sulfur, if that makes sense. Without the sulfur, you got bacteria growing in the fuel now. You also have a lack of lubricity in the fuel. So engine parts just wear more now anyway. So that's the EPA that set the fuel standards. On the refinery side, they're only going to make fuel to the spec that they're required to, so they can get it out the door to make more fuel. So they're not required to put biocides into diesel fuel to prevent bacteria from growing. They're just going to get it out the door. Well, where does it go? And then it goes to a pipeline. The pipelines transfer diesel fuel, gasoline, jet, all sorts of different stuff. They separate it with pigs or water. So they send down diesel and then they'll send down water or these pigs to kind of separate it down the pipeline. So it's another potential area of contamination. Then it goes to a terminal. In the terminal, it sits in big 500,000 million gallon tanks, large bulk tanks. But
is that accurate? Is that an exaggeration?
I mean,
or?
No, it's not an exaggeration.
Like there's literally
fucking 4 million gallon tank. So
yeah, let's beep.
might want to beep that up.
There are 4 million.
I've put quotes on a 4 million gallon tank before.
4 million gallons.
Yeah, you ever see those big, huge? Like you drive by a terminal and you
Correct.
see the big
there
things with
domes.
Those are petroleum tanks.
And stuff like that.
Those are petroleum tanks.
Wow.
That's petroleum fuel, dude.
Wow.
And here's the thing. Here's the wow factor.
Okay.
The petroleum is moving so quick through the supply chain the terminals don't have, so this is what happens. The fuel comes into the terminals, it goes in those tanks, and then it goes to loading racks where the trucks come in and they load their trucks. This process is happening so quickly that the terminals don't have, it's a complex logistical issue to say, let's go clean that tank. Because that means you've got to take 4 million gallons of storage, whatever the storage space, and put that fuel somewhere else, or stop 1 million gallons or 4 million, or however much it is, from going into those tankers. You have to disrupt that gigantic volume. Where do you put it? Another tank somewhere? Well, you can draw it down entirely, but as you draw it down, then you're selling less too, you know? So you're immediately cutting off, you're like cutting off a leg basically in order to, and it's not a good, no, don't. No.
There's one-legged people
So,
who are gonna watch this.
How can I better explain?
No, you were doing
so-
no, and this is a really good bite. I mean, like I said, we can use a lot of this, but this is a really good bite. I think this is really.
So it's a logistical issue for the terminals to go and clean the fuel that's in their tanks, right?
Sure.
So then that can get into the tankers. So now you got bad fuel that gets loaded into tankers every now and then and can get delivered to any tank anywhere. So that's one issue where supply chain is dealing with it, right? Now there's biodiesel also. We're taking kitchen grease, recycling it. I used to do this, pick up kitchen grease, filter it out, turn it into biodiesel. Well, that biodiesel has different properties than the diesel fuel itself with how it interacts with water, with how it gels in the winter time. Most diesel fuel has a B5 blend, which means 5% biodiesel. So if you got a 10,000 gallon tank, you got 500 gallons of biodiesel in that tank. And that, in different environment, biodiesel is going to act way different in, Canada, where it's super cold for, part of the year, as it does, it's different in Florida. So,
Go ahead,
the word that comes to mind, it's just,
okay.
There's a lot of fuckery with diesel fuel.
I see. All right, so we'll get a little bit off subject for a second. Talk about your background. Talk about your kind of journey, if you will, to you're the director of fuel quality for Fuel Guard.
Yes.
How did you get started in this industry? It shouldn't be that frustrating.
I don't know. Out of college, I got a job as a field technician for an environmental company. So I was doing like phase 1 environmental assessments, which is kind of like the historic background of environmental impact on a property. I wanted to get my hands kind of dirty, so I ended up moving over I started getting involved in phase 2, which is like the investigation of contamination. So we would go out and we'd drill to get soil and groundwater samples, put in temporary wells to figure out if there's any like environmental impacts from underground storage tanks. God, I don't know. Maybe I don't have to explain the whole thing. So
No, I think it's good.
So
Over time, people want to know who they're doing business with.
Okay.
I think yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so we do environmental investigations. That's kind of how I got into the petroleum world. Was investigating these petroleum leaks on properties, then pulling out the tanks, creating a remediation plan to clean up all the junk based on what the use was, whether it's a parking lot or a pharmacy or a playground. So I did that for a while. Then I went to go work for a company called Greenlight Biofuels. But actually, I don't know if maybe I don't have
say
to
that
name
part
it.
out.
Yeah.
Let's say what.
So
I worked
after
for a company.
yeah. So after environmental consulting, I like doing environmental consulting. I like doing the project work, but it was a big corporate-y place, and I kind of wanted a small business feel. So I went to a biodiesel company. And what they were doing was they were picking up restaurant grease, filtering it, and then delivering it to the biodiesel plant to turn it into biodiesel. I worked on the operation side of picking up and filtering all that grease. So we would go to restaurants. We'd give them a grease dumpster out back in a routine collection schedule. send vac trucks out. They'd suck all the junk out of the back of the dumpster, bring it back to our facility. We'd get rid of all the trash and water and junk and guck, and then we'd sell it off to our biodiesel plant. That kind of got me a little bit more into petroleum. From there, I helped a gentleman start his own fuel filtering company. He had been in the business and wanted to venture out on his own. That's specifically how I got into fuel filtering. So I helped him kind of with the operations, getting the business off the ground. While I was doing that, Guardian, no, actually that's not, God, that's not true. I gotta be a little bit careful about how if other people are, because there's like, so from, are you all right?
Yeah,
It looks like
I'm with you. No, I'm not falling asleep.
So from the biodiesel business, I got into fuel filtering by, I helped a guy start his own fuel filtering company. He had been in the business, working for a company for a few decades doing it, and he wanted to venture out on his own, and so I just got involved with him. It was something that I was interested in. That's kind of how I got into the world of fuel filtering. Fast forward a few years down the line, Guardian gets a hold of me, and
Here we are.
And I'm talking to this camera.
Yeah, talking to this camera. Now that gentleman that started his own business, he's doing really well, correct?
Yeah.
He's doing very big things with life, I hear. Okay, so, okay.
Moving on. Let's wrap it up in a little
Yeah, we've covered a shit ton.
I'm getting tired
I mean, it's gonna
talking.
take me. It would take.